Another week has gone by, Steve. Week is a long time in politics and life. How are you, sir?
It feels like a very long week, Mark. But yes, it's gone by, and as you say, we have arrived at the end of one and the start of another.
It's amazing, isn't it?
It's incredible how it rolls on, right?
Yeah. Well, that's because we are quite smart. In fact, some would say quite intellectual.
Some would say, others would say different.
Yes. Do you think that we happen to be in an era of anti-intellectualism?
No, I don't think we are.
Okay.
I think that we're in a very distinct culture that has been dumbed down, societally dumbed down.
Right.
But I don't think that we are anti-intellectual.
Because the reason I ask is we've been talking about a video that we've both looked at, and it's asking really about where did the smart people go? And although it's predominantly American focused, there are things that I could say of the world, us here and other people in, say, Europe. And we thought we'd go through it, didn't we? Talk about some of the points. And we're going to break this down in two. So I'm going to do the first 10 minutes and lead the discussion, and then you'll do the final 10 minutes of that 20-minute video. The first thing that came up was that the only people with large platforms on social media, and specifically YouTube, now talking about philosophical or social theory are, quotations, idiots. And at that point, they showed quite cheekily, I think, Jordan Peterson and Ben Shapiro, who are both right-leaning. So you can see where this video is coming from. They did say there's some exceptions. Chomsky, who is left-leaning, but if these people are still there, their seats are small at the table of digital discourse. So, do you agree with any of that?
I always think it's really arrogant of people to claim that somebody else is an idiot or stupid. That just turns me off straight away. And then to pitch that idea with imagery of someone who is like Jordan Peterson or Ben Shapiro. Neither of those two men are idiots. You may have a totally different worldview to them. And to tag them as idiots with the way that they did, I think does a disservice to that channel to start with. I don't agree with the way that they opened that up. And as you say, what they've done is right from the very beginning, they nail their colours to the mast as to which way that they're flowing. Chomsky, absolutely no doubt, very intelligent, clever writer, but that doesn't mean to say he's right about everything. Very left. And I would say the same about Peterson and Shapiro and others, that just because they're right doesn't mean to say they're right. When people open stuff up like that, it bores me a little bit. I think to myself, come on, you've got the potential here. You've got lots of followers. You've got lots of subscribers. You've got the potential here to actually engage in what I would call open dialogue without pitching it as clearly everybody who doesn't fit into my left-leaning agenda is an idiot. That is total BS.
I think why this video was created, it followed the coattails of an article that I think may have been either the New Yorker or something like that, about how in America, two specifically of the Ivy League universities were worried that students were coming through, and these were supposedly to be the best of the best, who were turning around to professors and saying, we're struggling reading books. We're not used to reading a book all the way through. What was not raised was, well, then how did they get there then? Did they not go through a vetting process? What kind of books are we talking about? And when I went to university, I don't think anybody ever went or was expected to read the whole book, which is why you always liked it if you picked up a book off the library and there was pencil annotations or underlining. So that's where I think this comes from. And also, what is meant by anti-intellectualism? We all have intellect. In fact, they reckon, and again, this is just another theory, there are 7 ways in which we can show individually our intelligence. One of them is through movement, and that could be sport, dance. Are we saying that there's an anti-intellectual of, say, football players? You know, Messi being the GOAT. Are we all saying, oh, he's an elite? I don't hear those kind of conversations. Are we saying that the people who show their intelligence through writing diaries, introspection or intrapersonal rather than interpersonal, are we complaining about them being too elite? No. What we tend to complain about is the two that most people talk about, maths and English. And it seems to be people are complaining of certain people in, say, Ivy League, towers in the clouds, in universities who are in the rarefied atmosphere of only talking to about half a dozen other people that know what they're talking about. And perhaps that's what the complaint is. They're too intellectual. Or is it that somebody's trying to make out, well, we're not all conversing to the same level that we should be? And it seems to be focused on politics. This seems to be something thrown at people on the right wing, saying you're fascist, you're anti-intellectual, you're right-leaning, you're not thinking things through, whereas people on the opposite side of the spectrum are very good and pure, and they're obviously able to go through certain complex situations without getting angry and violent. That's what it seems to be. But I just question, well, what do we mean by anti-intellectual then?
Absolutely, and I think that's the crucial point for when you're looking at this. What do you actually mean? What is your definition of anti-intellectualism? And as you've touched on it, those 7 areas or 7 different ways that you can actually demonstrate how intellectual you are, irrespective of what all of those actually play out to be. If we're talking about intellectualism as education levels, i.e. that you have got a string of degrees or PhDs or whatever else that you might have behind your name, then, and again, I don't even know if that's right either. There are lots of people who have got very focused and narrow fields of expertise, and I don't actually think that that's a bad thing. And I don't actually think that the way that some of these things are presented on social media, providing that they're open and you can have a two-way debate, a two-way conversation, I don't think that those are bad either, because they act like a hook. You've got to speak at a certain level to get somebody interested in something. This, to me, seems more anti-specialisation, anti-expertise at the highest level.
Yes.
That's sort of critiqued in this, as I see it. And I'm not sure that is a bad thing, because if I was to put this in a medical setting, if I'm going to go and have a very specific procedure on my brain, heart, kidneys, lungs, whatever, then what I want is I want the most boring man on the planet who has drilled down into the tiniest detail of any one of those organs I've mentioned. And I want him to be an absolute expert in it. And I want him to have, I don't care if he doesn't know who've been Britney Spears, Taylor Swift, or any of these other people are. In fact, I'm probably pleased if he doesn't. And I want him to be an absolute expert in it. So I think that to say, that people get sort of locked into this specialisation, which I know we'll probably get to as we track through this, I think is totally wrong.
Yeah. Well, certain specialisations, it seems to be an issue.
Yeah, specialisations where you can actually agree to disagree, it seems.
Yeah. It's a difficult one because at the moment, and it leads on to the second point, the question that was asked is did intellectuals fail ourselves, or did we fail them, or is it both? Now, if you cast your eye over history, I think the default setting is what you would, or some would call, anti-intellectual. There's been whole centuries in which we could not progress to a certain level. Let's take, say, for instance, what is erroneously called the Dark Ages. It wasn't the Dark Ages in parts of the Middle East and out in China. There was a flourishing of thought, and in India. But in Britain and in northwestern Europe, after the collapse of the Roman Empire, we effectively no longer had any higher levels of learning that most people could go to, like you could have done previously under the Romans. That's not to say that they couldn't. They could have travelled, and many did. And there was the higher learning that was kept through priests eventually from the 4th, 5th century onwards. But generally it's seen as a fallow period until the Renaissance, the rebirth of learning, and then the Enlightenment on top of that. But you can say that there were large swathes of time in which, using modern language, you say, there's not much learning there. But that's not to say it's anti-intellectual. That was just the economics. That was just the inability of people to do anything. When you have to get food on the table and survive harsh weather, that's all you're going to be focusing on primarily. And it didn't serve you to go off and suddenly leave the clan and learn. But now we have people who get stuff that they never would have dreamt possible. They go to school, kindy, primary school, and secondary. That never happened for centuries. So to say that we're an anti-intellectual era, that's BS compared to periods that we could say are butted up to this time. I think the problem is not that we're learning or not learning. It's that some people don't want some people to learn certain things in some instances, or value certain things. And I'm going to come to that when we get to number 3 about what they call the market application to knowledge. They said that if you was to go and do biology, which is going to get you to become a doctor and earn big coin, that's accepted. But there seems to be a swing in universities where they're getting rid of subjects that will not get people into high-paying jobs. And they say that, therefore, the critical thinking subjects, such as the humanities, are being swept to the one side, which is then creating a form of anti-intellectualism. Not that people say we don't value it in itself, they don't value it because it's not getting people jobs at the end of it. So people aren't taking those subjects. Therefore, they have to cut back. They have to release teachers because there's just not enough people wanting to learn them. And that was happening in the UK when I left in 2007.
One of the points that you asked was whether or not we failed the intellectuals or whether the intellectuals failed us. And I'm not so sure that it's either. I think that it's actually that society has failed people. And when I talk about society, I'm talking about the governance of society. So I'm talking about the people that are in power have failed the people. Because one of the things that you also talked on was that some people don't want you to learn certain things or get certain things. Those in power, those who have authority, certainly don't want you to be an independent, free-thinking individual. They want to homogenise everything. And so the way that you homogenise everything is to bring things down to data. So the things that you can push are things which are sort of data-driven, computer sciences and all of that sort of stuff, one would presume. The demise of the humanities departments in university is lamentable, in my opinion, and I've got no doubt it would be in yours. It's very lamentable. But what we get is what we deserve. And if we continue to vote in for people and have governance above us who don't promote certain things, then that's what you're going to get churned out. I think that we want everybody to be the same. We want everybody to think the same. We want everybody to act the same. We want everybody to agree with the same things. We could sit together and we could have very different views on a whole range of political issues. We could have a range of different views on pharmaceutical issues. We could have a range of different views on current affairs in terms of the international scene. You just only have to pluck a few things out of that. Do we support Russia? Do we support Ukraine? Do we support neither? Where do we stand with Palestine? Where do we stand with Israel? Where do we stand with the Republicans versus the Democrats? Where do we stand with Donald Trump? All of those things we could have different opinions on and different views on, which the people who are in power do not want you to have different views on. They want everybody to be the same. One of the things that we need to do is to continually engage with people who are different to us, who have different views to us, who have a different opinion to us, so that we can form our own opinions without becoming just an avatar of somebody else.
There was another video that I sent you, but we're not talking about that. And it was a guy in America who is a teacher, I think is at university level. And he was saying that the problem in America is Common Core, which I wasn't aware of, but he explains it. It's a bit like bringing in the national curriculum in the UK. What it effectively has done is make people become accountants, which is useful for large organisations, but not capable of standing up against those organisations by asking critical questions. And he said that's been deliberate. That's almost been a policy to make people compliant and not question. And therefore it's created a herd mentality. Okay, there's pros and cons to that. There's some people who will wholeheartedly agree with that and some will say, no, you're reading too much into it and everyone's clever in hindsight and all that kind of stuff. But that is a strong case to be made as to why currently we have people who are going into university and can't read books or struggling with books if they're high intellectual. And I must admit, some of the books that you come across, you think, who the hell got this published? It's unbelievably obtuse.
Mate, you know, if you remember when I was reading that bedtime book for children written in the 1950s for 7 to 11-year-olds, and the quality of the writing in that book was phenomenal by comparison to what we get today. So society gets what it deserves. Society has failed in terms of wanting to pursue excellence. What we are looking at is dumbing people down to imbecility, dumbing people down so that they will just get in line, get in step. You cannot afford to have people who will question, people who will ask critical questions, like you've said, making everybody bean counters. They're all accountants. You know, I look at this in my previous world, within the public service, the civil service, whatever you want to call it, depending on what country you're in, where there are a host of managers, accountants, in effect, but very few leaders.
Yeah.
And the problem is the management tag puts you in a position of leadership, and yet they're not leaders.
Yes.
They are absolutely not leaders. They couldn't lead their way out of a paper bag, and a soggy one at that. We are getting what we deserve in so many respects.
You reap what you sow.
You reap what you sow. You sow the wind, you reap the whirlwind. And this is what we're seeing played out. So I don't think that across the board that we are anti-intellectual. You know, where did all the smart people go? I think that this was titled, Where Did All the Smart People Go?
Yeah.
And I think so. There's shed loads of smart people, but they have a different perspective to the one that you're promoting on this channel. They have a different POV to things. They have a different worldview. They have different opinions because they are smart people and they're independent thinkers. And so they're not just going to be persuaded by your commentary. And they are very focused on very specific areas. So, I mean, what do you mean by smart as well? This is the thing, isn't it? What do you mean by smart? You know, somebody who is an expert in their field of knowledge is super smart. That doesn't mean so they know everything about ice hockey or what the top 10 Spotify lists are.
Yeah. I said to you before we started recording, you know, do you want followers on a YouTube channel to be fans or thinkers? And that leads into loosely the next couple. This video we are reacting to is on YouTube that is very conscious of getting hits, that is very conscious of being seen. And these people, I don't think they've been put into positions of authority in government or academia. They've just got a lot of followers who want to be entertained, hence the title, Where Have All the Smart People Gone? But they said a couple of things. I think I was waiting to see what your reaction was to this one. He talks about TED Talks, the guy. And he said that it was set up some time ago, and it's inspiring content, a mix of inspire and interesting. And a lot of it, and I remember watching many TED Talks about 10 years ago, and it got to the point where I thought, there's a lot of talking here, but nothing about changing the world. It's hopeful for the world, a future, but not rocking the boat. It's not like critically saying, as Christopher Hitchens would have done, this is wrong, or Dawkins, you got to get it, blah, blah, blah. None of that. And then there's this quote, middle-brow mega-church infotainment. That's what someone says TED Talk has become. It's entertainment over rigor. And that has got to be because of YouTube, social media.
Yeah, perhaps it has. I think it's perhaps also got to do with the Americanization of the West.
Oh.
Because I could lay that tag over the Christian church.
Yes.
Everything that you go to church not to actually wrestle with the book, to wrestle with the Hebrew and the Greek and to try and pull it apart and tease out the meaning of it, but to just be inspired, uplifted, entertained, and off you go again. There you go. Let's squirt a bit of sugar in your mouth. Now you're all good. Give you a bit of an energy hit for the next few days. Where I think that these things have their place and are of value is that they act as a hook. But if I was to listen to a TED Talk which really interested me, then what I'd do is I'd note some things down, whether it was references that were made, whether it was books that were referred to, whether it was other speakers that were referred to, and then I'd go and research them, and I would buy the book, or I'd listen to the podcast, or I'd watch the video to try and build into what had been said. So they act as a great hook. But if you say, my life is run on a TED Talk level, then I could understand why people would say, well, that's just shallow and it's just nonsense and it's milking everything down. I think that's one of the phrases they used, wasn't it? That this is all milking stuff down, where you have an opinion about everything. But so what? Everybody has an opinion. In fact, a good friend of mine says, opinions are like armpits. We all have them and some stink more than others.
Talking of opinions, that's my final point for myself. In the first 9 or so minutes of this, the cult of bullshitters. And it's linked to the fact that we now have talking heads a lot on news panels. And they're brought on to give their opinions. But no longer is it dissemination of the news or critically drilling down into the news. It's the rise of influencers, and we could be put into this part of the equation, Steve. We have YouTube channels.
Of course we could, mate. Our influence is worldwide, mate.
Yeah,
worldwide.
absolutely. And it's the fragmentation of discourse. So, for instance, he gives us the impression of like a funnel. He doesn't actually say this is in my head. A funnel of people that go onto YouTube, but it's only to shunt them into a very narrow room where everyone agrees with them. And you said it earlier, we need to get out of that. So you're meeting people who do not agree with you. But because you're going into these YouTube channels, which is the equivalent of an open, closed community, they're hiding in plain sight, so to speak. All that is doing is appealing to narcissists, sociopaths, and the fragmentation, as I said, of discourse. It's not permitting a proper, authoritative or intellectual discussion, which links into what I said about fans, not thinkers. I'm almost tempted to agree with. I think that the rise of the influencers, although they're good for entertainment, is actually maybe doing a bit of harm in terms of intellect.
And I wouldn't actually disagree with that. And I think that's where your social media to blame comes into things, right? Because it's the social media companies that determine what algorithms are going to be linked to what you view, how you view it, when you view it. Yeah. And then it will corral all that information, correlate it all, run it all through various ones and zeros to give an idea of this will be of interest to you. So all you get funneled is stuff which is going to be of interest to you. Whose fault is that? If you're going on the internet and you think the internet is open and that it's just going to promote whatever is out there, not what's your interest, then it comes down to the social media companies and the internet companies, whoever are behind what sites you're looking at, Google, whoever, to actually say, well, Mark is interested in knitting, so now I'm going to show him stuff with metalwork, something quite the opposite.
Yes.
And so you bring a balance into your life. Now, if you are somebody who is interested in finding out what different people think, you're going to do that for yourself because you're going to be aware that every time that you stick something in Google, it's going to come back to the type of things that you look for. So if you're smart enough, you're going to be aware of that and you're going to go, well, that's very interesting, but I don't want that. So what you'll do is you'll run a couple of different search engines, and so that you can get a balance. And I do agree that everybody is giving opinions and it is very much an opinion orientated world. Just because we have the ability to say something doesn't mean to say you should say it. Just because you have a view on something doesn't mean to say it's worth expressing. And sometimes you don't bother with that. Now, if obviously what we've been trying to do was with this little channel is what we caught up after being out of touch for many, many years. So it's actually given us see, these are the sort of conversations, Mark, that we would have had 40 years ago in the mess deck, and everybody would have been looking at us going, what are you two like? Where are you from?
Yes, that's true. You know, they thought we were idiots.
That's right. But these are the conversations that we would have had. So why is that? How does that work? Who said it? Where did we come from? So why are we following it? Should we follow it? You know, those types of things. And all we're doing now is we're just capturing this for posterity, I suppose.
Before I hand over to yourself, because you're taking the second half of that video, Stephen Fry was interviewed recently, I think it's by The Times, and mainly because he's got a new book out about Greek myth. And he was
yes, I've heard that book.
Yeah, and he was asked the question about social media, and he likened it to where the pond that we're drinking from, we're poisoning it. Not us, certain people. I think, and I hope I haven't got this wrong, but I get the feeling he doesn't like the likes of certain billionaire people who have taken over social media sites. But he said a fascinating thing, which I wasn't aware of. So when Facebook started to become big, they realized that they could monetize what they had created. But how do they do that? And somebody came up with 2 words in the code: maximum engagement. It would draw people in, keep them engaged. Now, that on itself doesn't sound too bad. But what engages us as humans? It tends to be shock, fear, doubt, gossip. So you look at the thumbnails that are all like by Edvard Munch, where they're all looking shocked, or some of the key words to get your attention. It's all negative. And he said, look, wouldn't it have been wonderful if rather than maximum engagement, they wrote down maximum knowledge, maximum truth, maximum virtue? Trouble is, what is knowledge, what is truth, what is virtue. Even those would cause issues. But it's just the fact that we're in this situation because of two words and what it's created in the social media sphere.
The social media thing is, I think it's brilliant. I think social media is absolutely brilliant. I mean, you and I wouldn't have caught up again probably had we not lived in the age of social media.
No.
So there's so many positive things which I think social media can do and can offer. You know, when I think of the Christchurch earthquakes and the student army that came together and mobilised all across Facebook and social media, they were absolutely fantastic. There are so many things that it can do exceptionally well. But I think if you're looking for social media to educate you, then you're looking in totally the wrong place. In much the same way, if you're looking for politicians to give you hope and meaning in life, you're looking in the wrong place, because it's not the job of government to give you hope and meaning. It totally sits outside of their purview. Nor is it the job of social media to actually educate you. It's an entertainment platform. At best, it's an entertainment platform. At worst, it's a cesspit of iniquity. But it's there to entertain you. And occasionally, as it entertains you, it might hook something into you that you think, oh, that's interesting. I wonder what more I can find out. And then it should be beholden on you to do some research, to do some digging. And if we're not encouraging people to do that, then Stephen Fry's absolutely right. We are basically peeing in our own pond, and that ain't a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely.